Okay, before we leave behind our discussion of social stratification within the English colonies during the 18th century, we need to discuss the role of women within these colonies. So here I'm talking about gender customs, gender roles in the colonies, and shouldn't surprise us that they are overwhelmingly patriarchal societies, as with most European societies. I introduced this idea of patriarchy a while back. If you recall, we discussed the old world versus the new world and how some new world societies were actually matriarchal as opposed to patriarchal. Thereby, we recognize how there's actual diversity in terms of social organizations within the new world societies. So here we see that European patriarchy continuing in the colonies, and it's not surprising. Now, of course, this means that men completely control and dominate all aspects of society, while women are largely excluded from the public sphere. That is to say, that social arena whereby you could have the interchange of ideas, especially important political issues of the day or economic issues of the day. Women are largely excluded from that. Certainly economics, they are excluded from. And this brings us to, let me skip down to the third line of the slide. Interestingly enough, you see a contradiction here, that women in the colonies, the English colonies, actually begin to lose rights as we see the colonies developing. So, as we noted, the colonies are economically developing. You see widespread prosperity, consumerism, and we also see other trends that lend towards what we call leveling effects, where things become more horizontal or more or less, free and equal. Okay, but women within the scheme are largely marginalized, if not left out altogether. Okay, so for example, we see this in this idea of coverture. Coverture actually has European origins, but it spilled over to the colonial world. And coverture basically describes the legal relation of women once they enter marriage, their legal status. And it's this, that once, and again, it's a law, once women enter the relation of marriage, her basic freedoms and rights, her liberties, are basically forfeited. She agrees to forfeit those rights, and in a way she becomes the property of men. Even her identity as an individual becomes subsumed, put underneath or beneath that of her husband. So that leaves her out of, any important, let's say, affairs of the family, right? She has no say in that, legally speaking. It's the husband who is complete control. And this is a law again, so it would last well into the 18th century. And you'll see fragments of this tradition of coverture exist even into the 20th century, where women, even let's say by the 1950s, would defer to their husbands, right, on all issues of importance, for example. Okay, so coverture is a legal expression of women's oppression during that time. They had no rights whatsoever. And of course, this is due to the patriarchal, taken for granted view that men should rule. Now, by the way, this would culminate in the 1800s. And we'll see two things happen that are gender related, emerging from this patriarchal beginnings. One is the cult of domesticity, and you can kind of gather what this means. It basically defines women as the more domestic gender. Naturally, they are naturally more domestic, and therefore, due to this inclination, if you will, this inherent tendency that they possess and men don't, uh, they are relegated to tasks that we call domestic tasks or domestic duties, domestic jobs like cleaning, cooking, child rearing, and so forth. All right, and still you can imagine this lingers in some societies even today. Now, related to that would be something called the doctrine of separate spheres, and this would arise um, during America's Industrial Revolution, which would begin before the Civil War. And things are obviously becoming more commercial, right? You have replacing that small family farm, you have factory workers, right? And you have business, you have the dominance of merchants rather than farmers in society. Men, once they reach maturity, they go out there in that cutthroat world of competition, right? The business world. Now, while this is happening, you see this doctrine called the separate spheres crystallize, whereby it's felt that women, and to be specific, wives, because it deals with a family, wives, once they enter this relation of marriage, they belong in the home. Why? Because of their inherent inferiority in terms of intelligence, as well as their domestic tendencies that are inherent as well. They belong to the home. They can't compete, in other words. They don't have the inner constitution, so to say, to deal or to compete with that cutthroat world of business. Rather, it's the stronger, more powerful man that must do this, right? And obviously, this is very gendered. So we'll see this continuing, as you can imagine, into the 20th century, whereby men were thought to be the breadwinners, and women should just stay at home and raise the kids and clean the house and cook for her husband. Okay, so this again begins to take form in the 1800s, and it obviously has its beginnings, right, with colonial societies that are thoroughly patriarchal. Let's review our argument that we're making here, and it's this, that we noted that there's this differentiation that describes the English colonies during the 18th century, and it depended where you went, right? Depends upon region. In some places, demographically, you see, for example, more immigration, even non-English immigrants there. Other areas you see aptly described as slave societies, whereby, especially in the southernmost regions, African slaves greatly outnumbered the English population, so on and so forth. And not only that, you see differentiation in terms of economics and religion. So, in view of that fact, how can we locate certain shared experience found among practically all English colonials? So we talked about at length consumerism, talked about religion and the Great Awakening. We talked about social stratification. And here we are with the fourth area that we will argue is a shared experience, and that's the public sphere. Now, let me first define the public sphere. I kind of did earlier, but the public sphere relates to that social space or social arena whereby ideas are exchanged and policies are fashioned. And usually the ideas are related to issues deemed to be civically important. Okay, so this would, of course, include politics and economics. Now, I should also mention that the public sphere was mostly found in the city, the urban setting, and much less so in the rural setting. Okay, so I could have easily called this the urban public sphere. Now, this is a time when you see the emergence and really the significance of these cities in North America I mentioned Philadelphia, but also New York and Boston are probably the three largest cities. Their populations exceeded that of 25,000. Okay, you had between 25,000 and around 30,000 people, which back then was very significant in terms of population. So it is within the urban setting that you really see the public sphere at work, and you see these ideas crystallizing. And needless to say, this is going to be an important institution when it comes to the upcoming American Revolution. You can imagine how this is going to be crucial, the public sphere. Now, it also deserves mention that it's still quite exclusive. Let's recall the English meaning of land and how that related to one's political status. And briefly, it was this, that if you didn't own land, you were supposedly enmeshed in a relation of dependency, which basically nullified any sort of political status, right? You were considered dependent and therefore unfree. Now, this spills over to the colonies, and this means that in terms of participation in the public sphere, those who were not property were excluded. But here's what's crucial to acknowledge here, to remember, is that in the colonies, you had a higher ratio of landowners compared to their native England. So what does this mean? It means that more men, and of course it's just men as we discussed, more men who are landowners could actually participate in the public sphere. And let's also recall how that relates to the elite here, being recast as not only those who inherited their elite status, but those who, by virtue of what we call natural development, could actually gain entry into the elite. And that will, of course, manifest itself in the public sphere. Okay, when you think about our founding fathers, and as we'll discuss, the Continental Congress, that's a form of a public sphere as they discuss what to do in the face of what they perceive as English oppression from Parliament and the King. Okay, so the public sphere is obviously important in democracies because rather than having a king being surrounded by advisors and them pretty much mandating, policy, here you have this public institution. So you could underscore here, underline public, okay? It's not just a monarch. It's not, say, the Pope when it comes to the Catholic world. No, it's the public. Even though, as I mentioned, it's still exclusive. Okay, now, as I mentioned, it's urban, but here's what's interesting is once developments happen in the public sphere that are important, the word gets spread through things like the newspaper, the colonial newspaper. So here we have the Boston Chronicle, and what the importance of things like the newspaper or political tracts and so forth. You're going to see this leaflets, political leaflets spread around. These things like newspapers, print technology basically, is going to spread to other people. Even though they're not participating in the public sphere, they could be informed about what's going on. And when you think about it, that's so important in what we call a democracy, right? We even think of the media. I know it's maligned today, but still, in principle, the media plays an important role in something that's very fundamental to democracy, and it's this: public opinion. Okay, so going back to the public sphere, though, again, it is still exclusive and very elite. You see the message at least spread through things like the newspaper, able to reach a wider audience, let's say in the rural areas, far away from the urban sphere, public sphere, and they gain this civic education or civic knowledge of the important issues of the day, And not only that, you see the formulation of what we acknowledge is very crucial democracy, public opinion. In fact, some writers and commentators believe that things like the media and public opinion is like, almost like a fourth branch of government, right? Aside from the three in the Constitution. And you see political scientists refer to this as countervailing institutions. Okay, countervailing institution, meaning that in a way it's a form of checks and balances. Once you have public opinion forged, it could form as a check. It could somehow affect those who are in elected positions of power, those who actually legislate over the people. So in principle, public opinion is crucial. It serves as a countervailing or counteracting institution, a crucial part of our checks and balances. So hopefully you can see how the public sphere is not only a shared experience, but something that serves as a leveling effect, to use your term. That is to say, it inclines society towards a more horizontal layout where people are seeing more so eye to eye rather than being formed in a more vertical fashion. So this will complete this video, and our next video will discuss some important intellectual history that's going to go on to influence the leaders and our founding fathers by the time revolution approaches.